They say that love can make you blind, but in my case, love didn't just blind me. It built a beautifully gilded cage around me for 10 years. For a decade, I lived a picture-perfect lie, a meticulously crafted fantasy woven by the man I swore my life to. I was a wife, a mother, and a partner, or so I thought. The truth, when it hit, wasn't a sudden shockwave. It was a slow, agonizing realization that every memory, every promise, every photo on our mantelpiece was utterly meaningless because legally, morally, and spiritually, I was nothing more than the other woman. I was the illegal second wife of a man who was, and still is, married to someone else. My name is Sarah, and I was 29 when I met David. He was everything my previous boyfriends weren't. Stable, charming, ambitious, and incredibly attentive. We met at a friend's wedding, the cliché beginning of a dream life. He was the groomsman. I was a bridesmaid. We danced all night, sharing stories and quiet aspirations. He was 33, a successful architect with his own small firm, and he carried a certain gravitas, a grounded maturity that I found utterly irresistible. He was upfront about his past, which, in hindsight, was the first brick in his wall of deceit. He told me he'd been married young, right out of college, to a woman named Eleanor. He described it as a starter marriage that fizzled out after 5 years. No drama, no kids, just two people who grew in different directions, he'd said with a sigh, painting himself as the reasonable, mature partner. He mentioned the divorce was finalized, clean, and years in the past. This detail was crucial. I never questioned it. Why would I? He showed me the scars of a past relationship, the wisdom gained, and the determination to make our future better. Our courtship was intense. Within a year, we moved in together. 6 months after that, he proposed on a quiet beach during a weekend getaway. The ring was stunning. An antique solitaire that looked like it had been in his family for generations. The wedding planning was a blur of perfect decisions. David was involved, but not overbearing. He let me pick the venue, the dress, the flowers, but handled all the boring paperwork. The marriage license application, the contracts, the financials. He was the responsible one. Our wedding day, exactly 10 years ago this coming fall, was the happiest day of my life. A large ceremony, all our friends and family, and the feeling that I was finally home. We bought a beautiful house, had 2 wonderful children, Lily, now 7, and Tom, 5, and built a life that was the envy of many of our friends. David was a phenomenal father, the kind who was on the floor building Legos after a long day and never missed a school recital. Our life was a testament to stability and genuine happiness. I trusted him with my whole world. The first crack in my perfect reality appeared subtly, an almost imperceptible flaw in the veneer of our life, and it had nothing to do with Eleanor. It involved David's mother, Patricia. Patricia was a classic, albeit slightly frosty, New England matriarch. She was polite, reserved, and always kept me at a distance. She loved her grandchildren fiercely, but her affection for me was always measured, conditional. She often made comments that, at the time, I brushed off as old-fashioned eccentricity. "You're lucky to have him, Sarah," she'd say, staring at me a little too long over Sunday dinner. David is a man of tradition. He does things right. I always thought she was referring to his financial stability or his commitment to family. The real trouble started about 6 months ago when David decided to refinance our home. Our joint finances were usually straightforward. We had shared accounts, but David managed the larger investments and the mortgage. He was better with numbers, and I was happy to delegate. "Just need you to sign a few things, sweetie," he'd say, placing a thick stack of documents in front of me after the kids were asleep. I'd glance at the signature lines, sign where the yellow tabs were, and trust him. That night, however, I noticed something odd in the paperwork he'd left lying open on the dining table. It was a section on marital status, and the bank's preliminary documents listed him as married spouse Eleanor M. Holloway. My heart lurched. I picked up the paper, my hands shaking. Eleanor M. Holloway. That was Eleanor's maiden name, the one he had mentioned. I quickly checked the next line. My name, Sarah J. Thompson, was listed under current occupant secondary borrower, but under marital status, his status was tied to her. "David!" I called out, my voice tight. He rushed down the stairs, looking irritated that I was still awake. "What is it, Sarah?" "I thought you signed everything." I pointed a trembling finger at the document. "What is this?" "Why does it say you're married to Eleanor Holloway?" "That's his ex-wife." David's face didn't go pale. It went blank. The kind of controlled neutrality that a seasoned liar masters. He walked over, picked up the document with an air of annoyance, and gave a deep, theatrical sigh. "Oh, that. It's nothing, honestly, just an administrative error. When you do a refinance, they pull old credit reports, and sometimes these things haven't been properly updated by the county clerk's office. Standard bureaucratic mess, you know. I'll call the loan officer first thing tomorrow and have it corrected." He casually crumpled the paper and tossed it in the recycle bin. I felt a surge of doubt, followed immediately by self-reproach. I was being paranoid. David was right. The system was flawed. Why jump to conclusions about my husband of 10 years based on one piece of misprinted bank paper? I apologized for getting upset and dismissed the incident. David kissed me on the forehead, assured me it was fixed the next day. I didn't ask for proof. And life returned to its organized rhythm. The calm lasted 4 months. Then came the earthquake. David's business was doing well, and he had recently taken on a complex, high-profile project out of state. He was traveling a lot, 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes longer. He was exhausted when he returned, often falling asleep quickly. I missed him, but I respected his drive. One evening, I was cleaning up the kitchen, and I noticed David had forgotten his work briefcase. He had an important meeting early the next morning, and he would need his presentation notes. I decided to pack it up and drive it over to the hotel he was staying at only an hour away. It would be a nice surprise. I unzipped the main compartment. Inside, nestled beneath architectural blueprints and a laptop, was a small leather-bound folder I had never seen before. It was old, the leather cracked at the corners. My curiosity was initially innocent. I assumed it held notes or drawings for his new project. I opened it. It wasn't work-related. It was full of papers, official-looking documents with seals and stamps. I pulled out the top one. It was a property tax bill for a small 2-bedroom condo in a completely different part of the city, a part David had never mentioned owning property in. I was confused, but not yet panicked. Maybe it was an investment property, but why hide it? I sifted through the other papers. There were bank statements, utility bills, and finally a certified letter from a family law attorney dated 6 years ago. The letter was addressed to Eleanor M. Holloway and David R. Holloway. The letter was a mediation summary regarding equitable distribution of marital assets. I froze. Mediation. Assets. 6 years ago. That was 4 years into our marriage. My fingers fumbled, and I pulled out the last and most damning document, a copy of a health insurance application. David's company provided excellent family coverage. I had always assumed our policy listed him, the kids, and me as spouse. This application, however, was old, dated just before we met. It listed David as the primary insured. And under spouse dependent, it listed Eleanor M. Holloway. Then I saw the terrifying line at the bottom, printed in bold, "Policy remains active. No changes to spousal coverage made since inception." My lungs seized. No changes. Active. The narrative David had sold me, the clean, finalized, years ago divorce, was a lie. He hadn't just not updated a bank form, he had actively maintained a financial and legal connection to his first wife 4 years after we were married, and possibly right up to the present day. The insurance form proved that, at least in the eyes of his employer, Eleanor was still his legal spouse. I felt the blood drain from my face. My first thought wasn't anger, it was disbelief. This has to be a mistake, a paperwork nightmare. My second thought was fear. If he was still married to her, what did that mean for us? I grabbed my car keys, the leather folder clutched in my hand, and drove the hour to his hotel, a cold, sick feeling pooling in my stomach. The surprise had turned into an interrogation. The drive was a haze of panicked logic. He must have just forgotten to sign the final papers. It's a technicality. It has to be. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The mediation summary 6 years into our marriage, the maintained spousal insurance. This was intentional. This was calculated. I grabbed my car keys, the leather folder clutched in my hand, and drove the hour to his hotel. A cold, sick feeling pooling in my stomach. The surprise had turned into an interrogation. The drive was a haze of panicked logic. He must have just forgotten to sign the final papers. It's a technicality. It has to be. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The mediation summary 6 years into our marriage. The maintained spousal insurance. This was intentional. This was calculated. I arrived at the hotel and marched up to the front desk, adrenaline pumping venom through my veins. "Room 712, David Holloway," I gasped, holding the key card they handed me with a hand that shook so violently I could barely swipe it. The hallway felt too long, too quiet. When I reached 712, the silence on the other side of the door was deafening. I didn't knock. I didn't want to give him a chance to compose his lies. I used the key card and the lock clicked open. The room was dark, the only light spilling from the bathroom, where I could hear the sound of the shower running. "David!" I yelled, my voice cracking the artificial stillness. The water immediately stopped. He stepped out, a towel wrapped low around his waist, his hair slick with water, his eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated shock, the kind of look that confirmed everything before a single word was spoken. His controlled neutrality had finally shattered. "Sarah? What are you doing here? I thought you were bringing the briefcase tomorrow," he stammered, pulling a robe on haphazardly. I didn't answer about the briefcase. I threw the leather folder onto the bed, the papers scattered, the certified letter from the attorney landing right on top. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously low, stripped of emotion. "Explain why, 4 years after we got married, you were in mediation with Eleanor about equitable distribution of marital assets. Explain why, on your health insurance, your legal spouse is still Eleanor Holloway. Explain who I am, David. Who am I if you were never divorced?" He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, his posture collapsing under the weight of 10 years of deception. He tried the denial route first, a desperate, pathetic attempt. "It's an administrative oversight, Sarah. I swear, the final paperwork. It just got tied up in court. We were separated. We hadn't been together for years. This is just the bureaucratic mess." I didn't let him finish. I was beyond tears. I was pure, burning logic. "Don't lie to me again. The insurance enrollment document is dated 5 years ago. You had to actively sign that. You listed her as spouse and me as nothing. Tell me the truth, or I walk out that door, and the next conversation you have will be with my attorney." The threat worked. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, and the whole ugly truth began to spill out, not in one clean confession, but in agonizing, piecemeal revelations. He admitted it. The divorce was never finalized. They had separated, yes, but Eleanor had made it impossible. She was vindictive and financially savvy. Every time he tried to file, she'd drag it out, claim hardship, demand an exorbitant settlement. He was in the middle of launching his own firm at the time and couldn't risk the legal and financial exposure. He claimed he was close, so close to the final decree when we met. He said he loved me so much he couldn't bear to lose me, so he decided to press pause on the legal battle and just proceed with our life, assuming he could finalize it quietly later. Later never came, Sarah. I got lazy. We were happy. It seemed irrelevant. We had the ceremony, the rings, the kids. That's what mattered, not a piece of paper. That's when I found the strength to laugh, a dry, hysterical sound. "It's not irrelevant, David. It means our marriage is invalid. It means I committed bigamy, though unknowingly. It means our children's birth certificates are based on a lie. It means Eleanor, not me, is your legal heir. It means I've been your mistress, your glorified cohabitant, for a decade. And why did you hide the condo?" That question brought a new, even more sickening layer to the truth. The condo wasn't an investment. It was where Eleanor lived. David had been paying her mortgage, her insurance, and her monthly allowance to keep her quiet. "She knew about you, Sarah," he whispered, avoiding my gaze. "She knew about the wedding. She let me have it as long as I provided for her. It was a separation agreement, a private contract. She got the money, and I got my second life." I stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. His starter marriage wasn't over. It was an ongoing, mutually beneficial financial arrangement that guaranteed Eleanor a comfortable, tax-free income stream, all while David got to play house with me. The sickest part? His mother, Patricia, knew. The frosty distance, the cryptic remarks like, "David does things right," suddenly made sense. She knew I wasn't the legitimate wife. She was protecting her son's convoluted financial setup. The emotional damage was overwhelming. I wasn't just betrayed by my husband. I was betrayed by my mother-in-law who had sat at my table, held my children, and judged me silently for 10 years. I spent the next 48 hours in a fog. I didn't go home. I stayed at a friend's empty apartment, spending the whole first day on the phone with 3 different family law attorneys, trying to untangle the knot of illegality David had created. The legal reality was brutal. Our marriage was void. I had no spousal rights, no claim to the house unless I fought it as a palimony case. And David technically had to divorce Eleanor first before anything could be settled with me. The fact that he was financially supporting Eleanor made his argument that their relationship was over completely non-existent. He was maintaining a marital financial structure while lying to me. When I finally returned to the house, David was gone. He had packed a suitcase and left a note, a pathetic apology stating he was staying with a business associate while I sorted things out. I changed the locks immediately. My focus shifted from anger at David to a cold, calculated fury aimed at Eleanor. She wasn't an innocent victim. She was a willing participant in the destruction of my life. She had knowingly allowed me to build a family with her legal husband. I found her number buried deep in David's phone records, listed innocuously as Holloway Finance. The call I made to Eleanor was the most difficult I have ever made. My hands were slick with sweat, but my voice was steady. "This is Sarah," I began, skipping the pleasantries. "The woman David married. Or rather, the woman David illegally married. We need to talk about the arrangement you and David have." Eleanor's response was chillingly calm, almost bored. "Oh, Sarah, I was wondering when you'd call. David is such a sentimental fool. He was supposed to keep this quiet. You need to understand, I have the legal leverage. I have the papers. You have nothing." She was gloating. She explained in painstaking detail that the arrangement was airtight. She allowed David to play his fantasy life, and in return, she was guaranteed a comfortable life without working. She said, "He told me he was bringing another woman into my marriage. I told him he could, as long as the price was right. She had seen me as a temporary toy he was paying her to use. That was the breaking point. The financial motive was one thing, but the sheer callous audacity of her viewing my life, my children, as a transactional sideshow fueled an intense need for retribution. I decided I wouldn't just divorce David, I would expose both of them. My attorney, a sharp woman named Lisa, advised me on my options. We couldn't fight the legality of David's first marriage, but we could certainly fight the fraud he committed against me. More importantly, we could use the children as leverage. David's fraudulent marital status put our children in a legally vulnerable position, and no judge would tolerate that level of deceit. The legal battle became a messy, public nightmare. David fought back weakly, desperate to keep the true reason for the separation, the fraud, out of the public record to protect his reputation. Eleanor, terrified that her quiet income stream would be cut off, suddenly became a co-conspirator. The court documents, once filed, revealed the full scope of the financial arrangement. David was paying Eleanor nearly $50,000 a year, funneled through his business account as a consulting fee, to avoid alerting my friends and family. This had been going on since the year we got married. Every vacation we took, every school tuition payment, was made while he was simultaneously funding his legal wife's lifestyle. The final blow came not in the courtroom, but from David's mother, Patricia. When the court threatened to subpoena her financial records regarding the property taxes on Eleanor's condo, which she had occasionally paid for David to conceal his involvement, Patricia broke. She called me, her voice trembling not with apology, but with fear. "Sarah, you have to stop this. You're going to ruin him," she pleaded. I told her he had already ruined himself, and she had helped him do it. 2 days later, a large sealed envelope arrived at my attorney's office. Inside was the original long-lost divorce decree from David and Eleanor's first attempt at divorce, dated a year before David and I met. It was signed by a judge, but the final stamp of the county clerk was missing. A sticky note was attached, written in Patricia's shaky hand. He told me he paid the clerk to forget to file the final paper. It was his way of keeping control over Eleanor. He never wanted the marriage completely gone. The shocking truth wasn't that the divorce was a mess. The shocking truth was that David intentionally obstructed the final filing a year before he even met me. He'd gone into our relationship, into our wedding, and into fatherhood, knowing his first marriage was a ticking time bomb he controlled. He didn't just forget to file. He paid to make sure he remained legally bound to Eleanor, using it as a financial safety net and a leash for her. He had never been ready to be a husband to anyone, only a financial controller. This revelation presented to the judge was the nail in the coffin. It proved premeditated fraud, not an administrative error. The judge was visibly appalled. The outcome was a devastating victory for me. The court sided with me, finding that David's actions constituted egregious fraud. I received the marital home and a significant portion of his assets, all designated as compensation for the 10 years of fraud and the emotional distress caused to me and the children. David was forced to finalize his divorce from Eleanor, finally, legally and painfully, which immediately cut off her financial lifeline, just as she feared. I was now a single mother, facing a long road of emotional recovery, but I was no longer Sarah, the illegal second wife. I was Sarah, the survivor, the woman who took back her life from a masterful deceiver. David sees the kids under supervised visitation, a condition I insisted upon until he can prove he is capable of honesty. The last time I spoke to him, he still didn't understand why the ceremony and the love weren't enough. He never will. The 10 years of marriage were a beautiful, perfect lie, and while I lost my husband, I finally found the truth. And in that truth, I found my freedom. The aftermath of the court ruling didn't bring instant peace. It brought a vast, terrifying silence. My house felt hollow, the walls echoing with 10 years of false laughter and fabricated intimacy. I remember the day I took down our wedding photo. It wasn't an act of anger, but of meticulous surgery on my past. I looked at the smiling faces, the genuine joy in my eyes, and the practiced, reassuring smile on David's, and I realized the only honest emotion in that picture belonged to me. My joy was real, but it was predicated on a fundamental lie. The children, Lily and Tom, were the hardest part of the equation. How do you explain to a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old that the man they adore, the man who tucks them in, is a profound deceiver? I shielded them as best I could. I told them simply that Daddy and I were getting a legal divorce, and he had made some very big, bad mistakes that meant he couldn't live with us anymore. Lily, with her 7-year-old logic, kept asking, "But Mommy, you always said people should just be honest. Why didn't Daddy just tell the truth?" That question, the simple piercing query of an honest child, was more damning than any judge's decree. I began the arduous process of financial and emotional rebuilding. I had the house, but I had no trust. The first thing I did was hire a financial forensics expert. David's financial life was a maze of hidden accounts and obscure transactions designed to keep Eleanor funded. The expert confirmed that the majority of his firm's consulting fees had been laundered directly to Eleanor, ensuring she never had to work a day. What was sickening was the realization that David had used our supposed joint funds, the money meant for our children's future, to sustain his decade-long fraud. This was not a man who loved me enough to marry me. This was a man who loved control enough to illegally sustain 2 lives. I found myself obsessively reviewing old bank statements, searching for other ghosts. Did he take Eleanor on business trips? Was there a second family? Thankfully, the evidence pointed to only Eleanor, the financial arrangement, and the control. He wanted the facade of our family and the security of his legal leverage over his first wife. It was about power, not passion. My own mother, when I finally told her the whole ugly truth, was devastated but fiercely supportive. She urged me to change my last name, to fully separate myself from the Holloway deception. I went back to my maiden name, Sarah Thompson. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming my identity from the rubble. My children's last names remained Holloway for now to maintain their connection to their paternal lineage, but legally, I was carving out a new, honest path for us. I also took the time to write a letter to Patricia, my former mother-in-law. I detailed the profound pain her complicity had caused. I didn't send it to her. I sent it to her attorney with a note. "Read this to your client. She needs to understand the human cost of her silence." The letter wasn't about seeking an apology. It was about ensuring that she could no longer deny the damage she inflicted. Eleanor, after the final divorce, tried to reach out. Her messages, delivered through her attorney, were surprisingly aggressive, demanding that David continue to support her, citing a moral obligation based on their decades-long tie. I laughed at the sheer entitlement. She had traded her wife title for a permanent annuity, and now that the annuity was gone, she was destitute. I made sure David's attorney was relentlessly firm. The judgment was final, the fraud was established, and any further attempt to extort money would be met with legal action. Eleanor's silence that followed was a small, satisfying victory. 1 year later, the house felt like home again. The shadows of deceit had receded. David still visits the children every Sunday, supervised by a social worker at a neutral location. He is quieter now, his bravado replaced by a hollow kind of defeat. He still attempts to justify his actions, saying, "I saved us from a messy divorce, Sarah. I thought I was protecting you." He still can't grasp that the lie itself was the only thing that needed protection, his ego and his control. I don't engage. My focus is on my children and the rebuilding of my own career. I've gone back to school part-time, pursuing a degree that David always discouraged, and I am thriving. The years I spent as the illegal wife were not a waste. They were an education in human deception. This experience taught me that the biggest tragedy isn't betrayal, but the blindness that allows it to continue. My story is out there now, and it is no longer David's secret. It is my testament to survival. I lost a husband, a marriage, and a decade of my life, but I gained an invaluable, unbreakable clarity. And that clarity is the foundation of my new, honest life.